Hello, thank you so much. Okay. All right, okay. So you may have seen this graph before by John Byrne Murdoch, and what it shows is that across a number of countries, young women are increasingly identifying as liberal rather than conservative. I think the precise, and when we zoom in, we can ask these sorts of questions in many different countries. And one thing that does emerge as especially common in many societies is that young men expressing hostility, some young men, a minority of young men, expressing skepticism about feminism, and a sense, this is in, for example, in the US, that young women's rights have gone too far, or that feminism has gone too far. So we call this hostile sexism. So a growing proportion of young men expressing concerns that women's rights are going too far, that women are getting benefits, women are getting privileges. And so the question is, what might be driving this? So as part of my forthcoming book on the great gender divergence, I've been studying the history and culture of every single society in the world and traveling and doing interviews with people and trying to piece together the jigsaw of what might be going on. And of course, it's very difficult to know why people do stuff, right? So this is me trying to build together that jigsaw, but of course I welcome your questions and critiques. So I think if we look at gender relations, we need to understand what's changing. So I want to highlight that the traditional institution of marriage is changing because economic and cultural shifts are enabling women to live independently. And as women become more economically and culturally independent, they can be more selective. So, as I would say, mediocre men, quote unquote, will find a very difficult struggle in the dating market. So men who are struggling then get left on the shelf, and I think this is triggering backlash among those less privileged men. So let me present data from around the world, going from the US, Europe, and also South Korea. So people marry, I would say very simply, very crudely, for one of three reasons: love, money, or respect. So last year I spent a month in Uzbekistan, going to different communities. There and like in India or Turkey or Morocco, marriage is absolutely crucial for respect. Conservative aunties and uncles will be asking you all the time, when are you getting married? A single woman will be totally ostracized. So everyone wants social inclusion and social respect. And for that extent, you need to get married. Historically also, let's be honest, people might also marry for money. Not in a hypergamous way, but in a society where women were expected to mother. Being a mother takes a big financial hit, whether it's the child penalty or, 60 years ago where you need a man to provide decent insurance. You need a man to be the breadwinner to take care of you and your kids, right? So money is a pretty good reason to get married. Or you might marry for love because someone adores you, understands you, and you want to spend the rest of your life with them. So this is a very crude trifecta: love, money, or respect. I appreciate it's much more complicated than that, but that's my very simple theory about the three reasons people get married. Now, I think marriage rates are falling in many countries. We see them falling in East Asia, in Latin America, in North America, and also Europe. Also, long-term stable partnerships are also falling. And I'm suggesting this is for two reasons. Because respect is no longer contingent on marriage and motherhood. So, for example, when I was traveling across Uzbekistan, people would always ask me several questions. Are you married? Do you have a baby? Do you like Uzbekistan? And do you like Uzbek food? And the answer was always supposed to be yes, right? But if I go to New York or San Francisco, no one is going to ask me, Alice, are you married? Right? So that's just a question that doesn't come up. I'm accepted regardless of my marital and motherhood status. Also, another big hit is that the financial motives are weakening. If you have economic convergence in young people's wages, as women increasingly go to university, and they're no longer expected to marry, then the motivation to get married is less prescient. So, for example, across countries, we see that less educated men are lagging behind. For example, in Hungary, as I'm sure many of you know, only 23% of young Hungarian men have attained tertiary education, as contrast with 36% of women. right? So in almost every country, we see this big, big rise of females soaring ahead and the less educated men struggling, right? And so this is going to interact with skill-biased technological change. So if there is a proportion of men who are not getting ahead in education and then really struggle to find those jobs because they've been displaced by automation. Like, for example, yesterday in Budapest, I walked into this kiosk and instead of a man or woman standing there serving the snacks, it was just 4 vending machines, right? So in a world where robots can do the low-skilled jobs, someone without skills is going to have a really, really tough time in the labor market. And so, for example, this comes from the UK. In the UK, in the first time ever, more young men are out of work than young women. In the UK, young men without education are increasingly out of work, out of education, and even sometimes earning less than women, right? So young men without education are really struggling in many, many countries because many of those traditional jobs like manufacturing or construction have been displaced and they're not moving into the skilled sectors, or they're not doing the feminized work that is low skilled, like in care economies, for example. They don't want to be nurses or teachers. So young men less educated men are falling behind because of this conjunction of young men of not fulfilling their tertiary education and skill-biased technological change and automation. And then if we think about the more educated men. So yes, more educated men are doing perfectly well, they're going to careers, but look how the modern workplace has changed. So back in the 1970s, you might see a scene like this, right? The young guy goes into the office and he has a bevy of adoring secretaries. The modern workplace is no longer like this, where you have these pretty young women running after your every need. So it's becoming much more egalitarian. Right? And as salaries converge, women no longer need to rush to get the bouquet, right? Once you can earn a decent wage, once you can provide for yourself, and once no one is tutting or shaming or stigmatizing you, then you don't need to be so desperate to marry for respect. So if we think about those 3 prongs of marriage, love, money, and respect, those second 2, money and respect, are totally weakening, right? So this means you would only want to marry if it's for love, right? Love is now the primary motivation for marriage. So what I'm saying is that if women only marry for love, then they can be much more selective. I'm only going to marry a guy who is charming, who is exciting, who is fun, who is witty, who makes me feel good, who maybe shares the washing up, doesn't beat me up, and is totally faithful. Right? Like you're raising your standards a little. So what happens if women become more selective is that marriage rates will fall. So in the US, people have hysterically focused on more single mothers. So this is Melissa Kearney's work showing you have more single mothers. And the concern has been, well, this is a problem for children. But what I'm saying is that if marriage rates fall, then you have more ghosted men. Men get ghosted. So men go on the dating apps and they're going to have a really tough time because they're not as charming, as exciting, as fun, as pleasurable to talk to as women's available options. So I think this tweet does it quite well. I would rather adjust my life to your absence than adjust my boundaries to accommodate your disrespect. But it's not necessarily just about disrespect. Like, so I interview young women in many parts of the US and Europe, whether it's Italy, Spain, Poland, New Haven, California. And like, I talk to young women about dating apps. And they'll just say to me, number one, there's one overriding thing that young women say to me. It was just like, he was just boring. Like, if a guy is just saying, hey, how is your day? Like, why is a young woman going to chat to that guy when she can watch anything she likes on Bridgerton, anything she likes on Netflix, including Bridgerton, or she can go off and have fun? So when I was in New York, at the University of Columbia, I went to Soul Cycle. So this is a thing in America where, everyone's got on their bicycle in the studio, and you've got some person, cheering, and there's loud music, and they're very excitable because they're American, and they're cheering. And all these young women, the prettiest, hottest women of the Manhattan's Upper East Side, semi-naked and smiling and grinning and laughing. And it was just this gay, catty guy. And I realized in this Soul Cycle spin studio that a heterosexual man would love to be adored by this ocean of young, pretty women, but he's been totally displaced. So as these young, pretty women can be so much more selective, the mediocre guy who is just texting, "How is your day?" he's not really offering much, right? They can be so much more selective. So all these guys are just ended up with no women adoring them, no women answering their calls. And people might blame the dating apps, but fundamentally it's an issue of supply, right? Women being more demanding and men just not being charming enough. So, I don't want to be rude, and obviously this is a caricature, a meme, but it's if, none of us, I do not say I would the most, it's tough for a guy without social skills who is not necessarily witty, hilarious, and funny. If that's the best you can do, then no woman is going to answer, right? So today in the US, 39% of men are now unpartnered. They don't have romantic partners. And this is much higher among men who are living in their parents' basement. So the mediocre man who is not that funny, who is not that entertaining, who is not that delightful, who is not that charming, and who doesn't have a big financial offer, who isn't that successful, is kind of being left behind. And that's a function of cultural liberalization and economic development. And so they're just dealing with this situation. And it's brutal, right? And I don't mean to laugh at it. I put this as an illustration, but it's painful, right? And I chat to young men about how hurtful it is, right? They might, they're trying their best to chat to a woman, but over and over again, they're just being ignored, ghosted, and feeling unwanted, right? It's a massive, massive hit to the male ego to feel that no woman wants you, to feel constantly rejected, right? To feel like a loser. Nobody wants to feel like a loser. But that's what's happening over and over again to many young men. And it's generated resentment. And so let me draw parallels with East Asia. So this shows that increasingly young... Sorry, the chairs are kind of in the way. Sorry, may I rearrange the furniture? So these are... Sorry. Younger women are increasingly never married and childless. And so when I was in Korea and Hong Kong earlier this year, that young women don't want to repeat this idea of self-sacrifice, of dealing with men who are not necessarily going to share all the childcare, as we know from quantitative data, who are not necessarily going to be totally committed and loving, right? They just don't want that deal. And this is partly a cultural, so let me focus on that. So this is partly, but even though South Korea still has massive gender pay gaps, there's been a lot of cultural liberalization. As women enter the public sphere, they're increasingly becoming journalists, writers. So books like Born in 1982 was a really strong feminist critique of Korean gender relations. And women are just saying, you know what? I don't want to live the same life as my mother. I don't want to be going to my in-laws for the Lunar New Year festival and me doing all the washing up and cleaning up. I'd rather stay single and live my life. I don't want to be mopping up after some guy. So young women are totally rejecting those ideas. On top of that, Korea has the worst dating market in the world because historically, as parents reduced their fertility, they disproportionately chose to have sons. So South Korean men in their 30s today, they're facing a lot of men in the marriage market, but very few women. So those men are set up to fail, right? It's super, super hard to be a guy in today's dating market in Korea. Because one, these young women increasingly don't want to marry. Two, there's a shortage of women. Now, on top of that, in Korea specifically, from 2016, 2017, there's been a rise of feminist activism against Me Too. In Korea, there's a massive backlash against deep fake pornography, spy cams. And that feminist activism is like a threat to patriarchy. And in response, men have got really angry and mobilized in resistance. So, for example, this was a Korean extremist group, feminist group, mocking men in the same way that Donald Trump has been mocked. But this creates backlash, right? So this feminist attack generates patriarchal backlash in a society that was already deeply patriarchal, in a society where young men were already being jilted. So South Korea is a very extreme case of that patriarchal backlash. Oh yeah, here are women mobilizing against the deepfake pornography. And this is men mobilizing, men of solidarity. This was a big movement that arose in reaction to that feminist activism. Okay, so thus far I've talked about these big structural drivers: skill bias, technological change, automation, economic convergence in earnings, and cultural liberalization. But then I think what is another really important part of cultural change is social media, filter bubbles, and cultural entrepreneurs. So for example, on social media, people self-select into the kind of discourses and communities that they want to talk about and learn from. And so young men have the increasing freedom and self-select to listen to, say, manosphere podcasts. And if you look at manosphere type things on TikTok, Instagram, social media, YouTube, or podcasts, you'll see like a really common critique is, why should men have to pay for dates? Or women are being too greedy, women are being too grasping, women are being too materialistic. So there's a lot of criticism about women's choices, that women are being unfair, women are being unreasonable, and it's a vitriol that is demonizing women. So this is a really important part of cultural change, insofar as cultural entrepreneurs like Andrew Tate are saying, you know, this is the way we should behave, this is what we should expect, and these are the right things. So charismatic people who market themselves as successful can send this message that, you know, women are the ones to blame. It's not you as a guy that maybe you should go to the gym and start trying to be funny. No, it's those greedy, grasping, materialistic women. They're the ones to blame. So it's generating this culture of misogyny that women are getting all these easy things. Or, for example, another kind of critique would be that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is going too far. That women are getting all these fruit baskets every day. Or, you know, women are being lavish with things, and what about us? What about us men, right? So, you know, it's the idea, you know, we see these environments, whether it's anything, whether it's racism, whether it's xenophobia, hatred of migrants, right? It's always culturally constructed. Okay. Oh, yes. And then, of course, young, impressionable men will see people like Andrew Tate as a charismatic, successful guy. And, hey, I want to be out like Andrew Tate. He seems pretty cool. And so now in the UK, YouGov did a recent survey, and they found that 1/3 of young men think Andrew Tate is pretty cool, and his ideas on gender are pretty cool. So, yeah, so that's super, oh yeah, he markets himself as super successful, super strong, surrounded by lots of hot, young, naked women. Oh yeah, so here's the survey. So young men have a super, 24% of British young men like his ideas about masculinity and how women should be treated. And what I'm saying is this partly a function of men's frustrations in the dating market, but, bitterness is then given a narrative. Social media can give you a narrative of that outward hostility against women. But that narrative could be different. It takes the cultural entrepreneurs to shape it. So I'm not saying it's just about structure, it's also we have some agency over that. Okay, now we want to talk about the femisphere. So, over the past 50 years, as women increasingly get jobs, we also see women becoming writers, women becoming journalists, women writing plays, women writing their own music. Now, does anyone know in this room, what was the most downloaded song on Spotify last year?
Taylor Swift.
Close. Actually, it was Miley Cyrus's song. Miley Cyrus's song, Flowers, right? And that was all about celebrating singledom, right? I can buy myself flowers. I'm going to have this fabulous, amazing time being single. And that's a massive change and a massive contrast if you think about Uzbekistan or India or Turkey, where everyone is supposed to be married. So the most downloaded song last year was all about celebrating women being single. It's giving women the exit option of being single. Right? Taylor Swift, I think, is really important. As you know, her Eras tour has been the biggest selling tour of all time. And I think she tells us a lot about gender relations in many countries. So one, we can see that many of her lyrics are defiant, celebrating her resistance. But it's more than that. It's also about her as an individual. You know, she stood up to the male-dominated industry and she re-recorded songs under her own name. And it's all about her defiance, her celebration of the community. And it's young women who are going to her, and it's this like ritual, synchronous bonding experience, right? And then, you know, as some of you may have seen, that she, she released a statement, you know, allying herself with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and it was saying, yes, I support them because of LGBT, because of abortion rights, because of IVF, and she signed it, childless cat lady, right? She is celebrating this idea that it is perfectly permissible not to have children and not necessarily to be married. And what happened in reaction to that statement? It triggered vitriol from Elon Musk, who will say, I will give you a baby. It will trigger backlash from Donald Trump, who has been castigating her and demonizing her. So this is a perfect example of how young female fans are adoring this person who calls himself childless cat lady, which historically would have been like stigmatized as spinsterhood. She is reclaiming that as a perfectly acceptable thing. This is the hero, the heroine that thousands and thousands are adoring and worshipping and adulating as the pinnacle of success. And waiting in the wings is, of course, her alpha male, strong, supportive guy who is, you know, cheering her on. That's the kind of partner that she's accepting. A great alpha male guy who wants the best for her, right? Who's cheering her on. So I think Taylor Swift really embodies this culture clash between the woman who's saying, yeah, I'm fine, happy being a childless cat lady, and the backlash that invites from Elon Musk and Donald Trump. That is really the encapsulation of many gender struggles today. And she's absolutely adored. Okay. Oh yeah, then I was mentioning the East Asian feminist literature. So this femisphere, right? So the idea that it's not, so what I'm saying is that, you know, it's partly about structural transformation and automation, but it's also the way that people shape narratives, whether that is Andrew Tate's misogyny and the manosphere, or also East Asian feminist literature like Born in 1982 and Taylor Swift. We're culturally celebrating, validating particular ideas about what is acceptable. And we're signaling what's okay, what's permissible. And this is also supported by mainstream media. So this comes from David Rosado. Sorry, let me move things away. So David Rosado has done some really nice analysis of different media outlets across the world. And as you can see, globally, in all these different media outlets, there's been a big rise in attention to sexism sort of since 2010. So people are increasingly highlighting sexism. Now, I already said that young women are disproportionately likely to go to universities. And now an economist might just think, oh, if you're going to university, it must mean that you're more skilled. But there's also a really important cultural dimension to going to university. Because if you think about what are academics talking about, well, so again, David Rosado shows that there's been a big rise in academic publications on transphobia, racism, sexism, homophobia. So university environments are increasingly progressive. So as young women disproportionately go into those progressive environments, they're inhabiting a very different cultural community to those young men who don't go to the university. So if you imagine a typical, say, Hungarian guy who doesn't go to university and gets a job on a construction site, he's living in a very different cultural world to the young woman who does go to university, right? Those are two totally different environments. So no wonder we're going to see a mismatch in the dating market. Yeah? So, and to recall that figure, it's 22% of young Hungarian men go to university versus 36% of young women. Aha, I'm finishing up. The final slide, perfect timing. Okay, so here's my point, is that young women are increasingly joining progressive communities. They're converging in earnings, and they're feeling free to pursue hedonistic pleasures. Singledom is no longer shamed or stigmatized. So, why tolerate guys who shirk the washing up, send tedious text, or otherwise fail to please? And dating has become much more competitive, and that breeds frustrations, validated by cultural entrepreneurs on social media and podcasts. Thank you very much. That's just my interpretation, but I welcome all critiques and questions. Thank you. Thank you.